When the vampires knelt, Ethan Walker thought they were preparing to kill him, because men like him did not get bowed to by nightmares in black armor. He stood in the middle of a snow-covered clearing in northern Montana, shaking so hard his teeth clicked, wearing only a torn flannel shirt, while his old army coat hung around the shoulders of the most dangerous woman he had ever seen. Dawn was bleeding red over the pine trees, turning the fresh snow the color of rusted copper. Behind him, inside the ruined chapel, Princess Evelyn Blackwood breathed in shallow, uneven pulls, her pale fingers gripping the edges of his coat like it was the last warm thing left in the world. In front of him, hundreds of vampires had arrived without a sound. 1 second the forest had been empty except for wind and distant crows. The next, the trees were filled with crimson eyes, polished boots, long black coats, and blades kept carefully lowered but not sheathed. Ethan had seen soldiers move quietly before. He had never seen an army appear like the night itself had decided to take human shape. The first vampire to step forward was a tall woman with silver hair braided beneath a crown of dark metal. Her face was beautiful in the cold, unreadable way statues were beautiful, and every creature behind her seemed to hold its breath when she lifted one gloved hand. Ethan raised the wrench he had been clutching all night, though he knew exactly how ridiculous it looked. A roadside rescue mechanic with a 12-inch wrench facing an immortal royal guard. His fingers were numb. His left cheek stung from the cold. His boots were soaked through from standing in the snow. But he still placed himself between them and the chapel door, because behind that door was a wounded woman who had told him to run, and Ethan had never been good at leaving people behind. The silver-haired woman looked past him, toward the coat around Evelyn's shoulders. Then her gaze dropped to the dark red mark glowing faintly along its torn lining. The entire clearing changed. Not with noise, with silence. A deeper silence than before, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound like an accusation. One by one, the vampire soldiers lowered themselves to one knee. Armor touched snow. Heads bowed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ethan stared at them, waiting for the trick, the trap, the punchline. Then the tallest warrior, a broad-shouldered man with scars pale against his throat, pressed one fist to his chest and spoke in a voice that rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Chosen mate of Princess Evelyn Blackwood. Ethan blinked. No, he said, because that was the only word his frozen brain could find. No, you've got the wrong guy. I didn't choose anything. Behind him, Evelyn shifted inside the chapel, and he heard the soft scrape of her hand against the stone floor. The silver-haired woman stepped closer, her crimson eyes fixed on Ethan with a sorrow that looked older than America itself. "Mr. Walker," she said, as if she already knew every mistake he had ever made. "The law did not ask what you intended. It only saw what you gave." Ethan looked down at his coat, at the royal blood dried into the fabric, at the strange symbol burning like a thread of sunrise across the lining. 12 hours earlier, he had been a broke tow truck driver with a bad knee, a stack of overdue bills, and one rule left from his army medic days. If someone is still breathing, you try. He had not walked into that storm looking for a princess. He had not known about ancient vampire laws, royal blood, or mate bonds sealed before dawn. He had only seen a woman shaking in the cold, trying to act like pain could not touch her, and he had covered her with the only warm thing he owned. 12 hours earlier, Ethan Walker was parked beside mile marker 41 on Black Hollow Road, eating a gas station sandwich that tasted like wet cardboard and watching snow erase the world beyond his windshield. The heater in his tow truck worked only when it felt generous, which meant every few minutes the cab filled with a cough of warm air and then returned to the kind of cold that settled into old injuries. His right knee ached beneath his jeans, the same knee that had ended his time in uniform after the convoy accident outside Kandahar, the same knee that reminded him every winter that one bad decision could follow a man for the rest of his life. A paper cup of coffee sat in the holder, long since gone lukewarm. On the passenger seat lay a stack of unpaid envelopes, the top one stamped with the logo of St. Mary's Medical Center. His younger sister, Rachel, had smiled through every treatment, every appointment, every bill she pretended not to notice, but Ethan noticed all of them. He noticed the red numbers. He noticed the due dates. He noticed that being a decent man did not make the bank wait politely. The radio cracked once, then went quiet again. Out here in the northern Montana mountains, Service came and went like a nervous animal. Most nights, Ethan ran calls for slid-off pickups, dead batteries, tourists who trusted rental cars more than weather reports, and locals too stubborn to admit a blizzard was stronger than four-wheel drive. He knew every bend in the road, every ditch that swallowed tires, every guardrail dented by someone who had been lucky enough to walk away. But Black Hollow Road was different. The county maintained it just enough to deny responsibility and warned everyone not to cross the old stone bridge after sunset. No official reason, no printed law, just a habit passed from dispatcher to dispatcher, deputy to deputy, tow driver to tow driver. Do not take calls past the bridge after dark. Ethan had asked why his first week on the job. The owner of the garage, a broad man named Frank Bell who had smoked for 40 years and laughed at almost everything, had not laughed then. He had only said, "Some roads do not belong to us after sundown." Ethan had thought it was mountain superstition, the kind people use to dress up bad cell service and missing hikers. Then he had started seeing the black cars. Not often, maybe once every few months. Long, silent vehicles with tinted windows and no license plates that reflected properly, moving along the pass without headlights as if the darkness was making room for them. He never followed. He was not stupid, but he looked. Men like Ethan always looked. They looked because they had spent too much of life arriving after something had already gone wrong, and the habit of watching for trouble never really left. The dashboard clock read 7:18 p.m. when dispatch finally broke through the static. "Ethan, you still near Black Hollow?" The voice belonged to Marcy, the night dispatcher, usually sharp enough to cut metal, but now strained thin. Ethan straightened. "I am near the lower turnout. What have you got?" Static swallowed her answer, then released pieces of it. Possible crash past the bridge. Multiple reports of lights in the ravine. No law enforcement available yet. Ethan looked through the windshield toward the road ahead. Snow hissed sideways under the glow of his headlights. The old stone bridge was less than a mile away, hidden behind the bend. "Past the bridge," he repeated. "Marcy, you know Frank's rule." "I know," she said, and for 1 second she did not sound like a dispatcher at all. She sounded like someone standing outside a locked door. But the caller said there was someone alive. Ethan closed his eyes. There it was. The sentence that always found him. The one that reached past caution, past experience, past the quiet voice that said a man with bills and a bad knee should not go looking for trouble in a snowstorm. Someone alive. He saw, not the road, but a dusty afternoon years ago, a young private pinned under twisted metal, everyone shouting to wait for clearance. Wait for orders. Wait for the safe call. Ethan had not waited then. He had lost his badge for it, lost his career for it, but the private had gone home to his mother. That had been enough on the good days. On the bad days, he was still trying to convince himself. His hand moved to the gear shift before he had fully decided. The tow truck groaned as he pulled onto the road, amber lights turning slowly on the roof, their reflection flashing over the snowbanks like warning beacons no one was around to see. "I'm going to take a look," he said. Marcy did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was lower. "Ethan, if it feels wrong, turn back." He almost smiled. Everything feels wrong after mile marker 41. The road narrowed as he climbed, pine trees closing in on both sides until their branches scraped the truck like fingernails. Wind shoved against the cab hard enough to make the steering wool tremble. The stone bridge appeared through the storm, slick and pale, its low walls capped with snow. Ethan slowed at the entrance. For a moment, the headlights caught something carved into the side of the bridge, a symbol like a crown split by thorns. He had driven this road for 3 years and had never noticed it before. The radio burst into static so loud he winced. Beneath it, almost too soft to hear, came a second voice, not Marcy's, not anyone from County Dispatch. Calm. Female. Cold enough to raise the hair on his arms. Royal escort down. Silver contamination confirmed. Protect the princess until dawn. Then the radio died. Ethan stared at it, his breath fogging in the cab. "Princess," he said to the empty truck. Outside, somewhere beyond the bridge, a faint red light pulsed once through the falling snow. Not emergency lights. Not flares. Something deeper, slower, like a heartbeat under the mountain. Ethan should have turned around. He knew that with perfect clarity. Instead, he drove across the bridge. The far side of the bridge did not feel like Montana anymore. Ethan could not have explained it to anyone in a way that would not sound ridiculous, but the road seemed older there, narrower, as if the mountain had been waiting all night to close its fist around him. His headlights carved two pale tunnels through the snow, catching flashes of black trunks, frozen branches, and the occasional metal reflector half buried along the shoulder. The red pulse came again, brighter this time, not from the road but from somewhere below it. Ethan eased off the gas. The tow truck rolled forward another 20 feet, tires crunching over ice, and then the smell reached him through the vents. Not smoke exactly. Something sweeter, colder, mixed with hot engine oil and the sharp bite of burned metal. His hand tightened on the wheel. He had smelled enough crash sites to know when a vehicle had gone over. He killed the siren lights, leaving only the headlights and the low hum of the engine. Silence pressed in so quickly that the truck suddenly felt like the last warm room on Earth. The radio remained dead. No Marcy, no county channel, no strange voice, just the faint tap of snow striking the windshield. Then Ethan saw the first black car. It was not on the road. It hung halfway over the ravine, nose down, rear wheels hooked against a twisted guardrail like a hooked fish. It was long, sleek, expensive, the kind of vehicle that looked more suited to a diplomatic motorcade than a mountain pass. Steam lifted from its hood in ghostly white ribbons. The windows were dark, but not because of tin alone. Frost had spread across the glass from the inside in delicate branching patterns, like ferns made of ice. Ethan parked at an angle, set the brake, grabbed his flashlight, medical kit, and crowbar, then stepped into snow nearly up to his shins. The cold took his breath away. His boots slid once on the shoulder, and he steadied himself against the truck door, listening. No cries, no horns, no footsteps, only wind moving through the pines, and, far below, the dull creak of metal settling. Emergency roadside assistance, he called, feeling stupid the second the words left his mouth. If anyone can hear me, make a sound. Something answered from inside the car. Not a voice. A soft knock. Once. Then twice. Ethan moved fast. He reached the rear passenger door and swept his flashlight through the frosted glass. For one suspended second, he saw the interior with impossible clarity. Black leather seats. A silver emblem on the floor mat. A crown wrapped in thorns. A gloved hand resting against the window. Then the light flickered, and the hand was gone. Ethan swallowed. Okay, he whispered. That is not unsettling at all. The door would not open. The frame had been around it, sealed tight by impact and ice. He hooked the crowbar into the seam and pulled, his bad knee protesting, shoulders burning beneath his coat. The metal gave with a low groan. When the door finally cracked open, air spilled out so cold it felt preserved, untouched by any ordinary season. Inside, the back seat was empty except for torn black fabric, scattered glass, and a streak of dark red across the upholstery that made Ethan pause. It led out the opposite door, across the snow, and toward the trees. He crouched beside it. The trail was not random. Someone had climbed out. Someone had moved under their own strength, or had tried to. He followed it with the flashlight beam, and the forest returned the glow in small red fragments, each one half covered by falling snow. Then he noticed the second vehicle farther ahead, almost hidden behind a bend. It had struck a pine, but there was no chaos around it, no panicked footprints, no scattered luggage. Instead, the snow was marked by smooth, deliberate lines, as if several people had approached from the woods and then vanished back into them. Ethan lifted the flashlight higher. 3 black arrows were sunk into the hood, each tipped with pale metal that gave off a faint blue sheen. He did not touch them. He had no idea why every instinct in his body told him not to, but he had learned to trust the kind of fear that arrived before logic. The wind shifted. A voice rasped from somewhere near the fallen vehicle. Ethan turned sharply, crowbar raised. A man in dark armor lay propped against the open driver's side door, his helmet cracked, one hand pressed to a small device blinking weakly against his chest. He was not old, yet his eyes carried a tiredness that made age meaningless. His skin was pale, his lips almost gray, and when he looked at Ethan, his pupils flashed red for one frightening instant before dimming again. Ethan froze. The man did not reach for him. He only lifted one trembling hand toward the woods. "Human," he said, each word strained but clear enough. "Listen carefully." Ethan took one step closer, keeping the crowbar low but ready. I called for help. More people are coming. The man gave a thin, humorless breath. Your people will not come here before sunrise. He gripped Ethan's sleeve with surprising strength. His fingers were icy through the fabric. They used silver fire. They knew our route. They knew her guards. This was not a hunt. It was an extraction. Ethan looked toward the blood trail disappearing between the pines. Who are they after? The man's expression changed then, and Ethan saw fear, not for himself, but for someone far beyond his reach. Princess Evelyn Blackwood, he said. If they take her before dawn, 2 kingdoms will blame the wrong enemy. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest. Ethan and the guard both went still. The sound came again, farther away, careful and measured. Not an animal. Not a rescue team. The guard pushed the blinking device into Ethan's palm. It was no larger than a pocket watch, warm despite the cold, engraved with that same thorn-wrapped crown. Follow the red signal, he whispered. She will refuse your help. Help her anyway. Ethan looked down at the device. Its faint red light pulsed toward the trees like a compass with a heartbeat. When he looked back up, the guard's eyes were fixed on the dark woods, his face calm now in a way Ethan did not like at all. Go, the guard said, and do not let them hear you say her name. Ethan should have run to the truck. He should have driven back over the bridge, found a working phone, and let people with badges, weapons, and better explanations handle whatever kind of nightmare this was. Instead, he tucked the device inside his coat, tightened his grip on the medical kit, and stepped off the road into the trees, following the fading trail of royal blood into Black Hollow. The red signal led Ethan away from the road and into a part of the forest where the snow seemed to fall more slowly, as if the trees were holding their breath. Every few steps, the small device in his coat pocket warmed against his ribs, pulsing once when he moved in the right direction and cooling whenever he drifted off the invisible path. He kept his flashlight angled low, shielding the beam with one hand, because the broken guard's warning had settled deep into him. Do not let them hear you say her name. That one sentence made every branch creak like a footstep and every dark gap between the pines feel occupied. The blood trail faded beneath fresh snow, then returned in faint red spots on tree bark and stone, never enough to explain how far she had traveled, only enough to prove she had kept moving when any normal person would have collapsed. Ethan had seen wounded people push themselves too far before. He knew the stubborn, terrible math of survival, how the body spent tomorrow's strength just to get through the next minute. Whoever this princess was, she had spent a fortune of it. The forest sloped downward, and the wind changed. It no longer carried the smell of engine smoke from the crash site. Now it carried old wood, frozen earth, and something metallic and sharp that made his teeth ache. Silver, he thought, though he had no reason to know what silver smelled like when it was hurting something that should not exist. Ahead, beyond a curtain of snow-laden branches, a shape appeared in the dark. At first Ethan thought it was a cabin, but as he came closer, he saw a small stone chapel crouched between the trees, half swallowed by the mountain. Its steeple had cracked years ago and leaned at an angle, and the cross at the top had bent under the weight of ice. One stained glass window remained, though most of its colors had gone dark with grime. The only light inside was red, low and unsteady, pulsing in time with the device against Ethan's chest. He stopped at the broken gate. Every reasonable part of him whispered that a man did not survive by walking into forgotten chapels glowing red in the middle of restricted mountain woods. Then a soft sound came from inside. Not a scream, not even a cry. A breath pulled in too sharply by someone trying not to make any noise at all. Ethan moved. The chapel door had been forced open earlier. One hinge cracked. Snow drifted across the threshold. He stepped inside with the medical kit in one hand and the crowbar in the other. His flashlight swept over rows of overturned pews, water-stained hymnals, candles melted down to black stubs, and the statue of an angel near the altar. The angel's head was missing. One wing had broken off and lay across the floor like a white stone feather. Beneath that ruined statue sat the woman he had been sent to find. Ethan forgot to breathe. She was not what his childhood nightmares would have called a vampire. She was worse, because she looked real. She wore a torn white coat over dark formal clothing that might once have belonged in a royal ceremony, now marked by snow, ash, and travel through the woods. Her skin was pale with the cold. Her black hair had come loose from its pins, and her eyes glowed a deep, exhausted red when they lifted to him. There were fangs, yes, small and unmistakable when her lips parted. But what stopped him was not the danger. It was the way she sat perfectly upright despite the tremor in her shoulders, one hand pressed against her side, refusing even now to look helpless. Power clung to her like perfume in winter. So did pain. Ethan raised both hands slowly, letting the crowbar hang loose from 2 fingers. "I am not here to hurt you," he said. Her gaze moved from his face to the kit, then to the device glowing inside his open coat. Something like grief passed across her expression before she buried it under command. "You should not have that." Her voice was calm, but thin at the edges, like glass under pressure. "One of your guards gave it to me." The red in her eyes sharpened. "Then he is gone." Ethan did not answer, and that was answer enough. For the first time, her posture faltered. Only a fraction, only for a second, but he saw it. The princess looked toward the chapel door, past Ethan, into the forest. "You need to leave." "Not without checking that wound." "You do not understand what I am." "I understand you are injured." Her eyes flashed brighter, and the air around the altar seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Human, listen carefully. If you come closer, my scent will cling to you. If my clan finds your warmth on my skin, they will bind you into laws older than your country. If my enemies find you, they will use you. If I lose control, I may frighten you in ways you are not prepared for." Ethan stood very still. The smart answer was yes, ma'am, good luck, and a fast walk back to the truck. But she was shaking. Not dramatically, not for sympathy, but in small waves she could not hide. Her fingers had tightened around the broken edge of the angel statue until stone dust flaked under her nails. Ethan lowered the crowbar to the floor. The soft clink echoed through the chapel. "My name is Ethan Walker," he said. "I run roadside rescue out of West Glacier. I am very underqualified for whatever this is. But I was an army medic before I was a tow truck driver, and you are sitting in an abandoned chapel during a blizzard with a silver wound and people looking for you. So you can threaten me after I make sure you do not fall over." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, not quite disbelief. "You speak to royalty like that?" "Only when royalty is bleeding on the floor." A distant sound moved through the trees outside. 3 soft whistles, too even to be wind. Evelyn heard it too. Her face changed completely. The woman becoming the princess becoming something ancient and cold. "They are close," she whispered. Ethan picked up his medical kit, crossed the chapel before he could lose his nerve, and knelt beside her beneath the broken angel. She watched every movement, dangerous, even weakened, proud, even cornered. When he opened the kit, his hands were steady. That surprised him. It seemed to surprise her too. "This will hurt," he said. "Everything does," Evelyn replied. Then her eyes locked on his coat, on the thick old army jacket still wrapped around him, and for the first time her voice carried fear. "Whatever happens next, Ethan Walker, do not cover me with that." Outside, a bootstep pressed into the snow just beyond the door. The bootstep outside the chapel did not rush forward, and that was what made it worse. Whoever stood beyond the broken door was patient. Ethan had heard that kind of patience before in men who believed the room already belonged to them. He glanced at Evelyn, and the warning in her eyes told him everything she refused to say. The people outside were not rescuers. The medical kit lay open between them, small and almost insulting against the ancient cold pressing through the chapel walls. Ethan pulled out gauze, antiseptic, and a roll of compression wrap, then looked at the silver dark mark near Evelyn's ribs without touching it yet. The wound gave off a faint pale shimmer, like moonlight trapped under ice. Evelyn drew a careful breath through her teeth and said, "If you have any survival instinct, Mr. Walker, you will take 3 steps back and pretend you never found me." Ethan kept his voice low. "My survival instinct has a long history of bad management." Her crimson eyes narrowed. "This is not courage. This is ignorance." "Maybe," he said, tearing open a bandage with his teeth. "But ignorance is already here, and it brought first aid." A faint scrape sounded outside, followed by a whisper in a language Ethan did not know. Evelyn's fingers closed around his wrist before he could move closer. Her hand was cold enough to shock him, but her grip was steady. "They want me alive," she said. "That means they may leave you alive if you step away now. That is not as comforting as you think it is. It was not meant to comfort you. It was meant to save you. For a moment, the red in her eyes softened, and Ethan saw the woman under the title, exhausted, furious, and carrying the kind of loneliness that did not come from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who only saw a crown. Then the chapel door creaked inward half an inch. Ethan moved before fear could freeze him. He slid one of the fallen pews across the stone floor, slow enough not to sound panicked, then wedged it against the door with the crowbar. The wood shuddered once from the other side. Dust drifted from the old beams above. Evelyn watched him with open disbelief. You are barricading a chapel door against trained night soldiers with church furniture. It is heavy church furniture. That is your strategy? No, that is my delay. He returned to her side and pressed folded gauze around the wound. Evelyn's shoulders tensed, but she made no sound. Her pride was almost frightening. Ethan had seen grown men shout over smaller pain, but she only stared past him at the ruined altar as if pain was a servant she refused to acknowledge. You can react, he said quietly. No one here is keeping score. Everyone is always keeping score. Not me. That made her look at him. The chapel door trembled again, harder this time. Snow blew through the crack beneath it, glittering in the red glow like ground glass. Ethan worked quickly, cleaning what he could, careful not to press the shining silver deeper. The moment the antiseptic touched the wound, a thin line of steam rose, and Evelyn's hand clamped over the edge of the broken angel wing. Stone cracked faintly beneath her fingers. Ethan paused. Sorry. Do not apologize for trying to keep me alive. Where I come from, we apologize when something hurts. Where I come from, pain is usually policy. The words were dry, almost bitter, and they landed harder than she seemed to expect. Ethan looked up, but she turned away. Outside, one of the strangers spoke in English at last, his voice smooth and polite. Princess, your blood trail ends here. Come quietly, and the human may walk away with only a frightening memory. Evelyn's expression went blank, royal, and cold. They are lying, she whispered. Ethan nodded. Figured. Then why are your hands still steady? Because if I let them shake, the bandage goes on crooked. Her eyes held his for half a second too long. Then a blade of pale light slipped through a crack in the roof and touched the floor near her boot. Dawn was closer than Ethan realized. Evelyn flinched away from it, not in terror but in recognition, as if the sun was an old enemy arriving early. The silver in her wound brightened. Her breathing hitched. Ethan felt the temperature around her drop, felt her body losing the fight against cold, silver, and sunrise all at once. You need warmth, he said. Evelyn's head snapped toward him. No, you are freezing. No, the wound is not closing. Ethan, listen to me. For the first time, she used his name without command wrapped around it. That should have stopped him. Instead, it made the decision worse, because now she sounded afraid for him. If you cover royal blood with a living mantle before dawn, the old law will answer. It does not care about intent. It does not care about mercy. It will mark you. The door buckled again. The pew scraped back an inch. Ethan looked from the door to the light creeping across the chapel floor, then to Evelyn's trembling shoulders. His army coat was old, heavy, lined with quilted fabric, smelling faintly of motor oil, pine smoke, and every winter he had survived since leaving the service. It was the warmest thing he owned. I am not doing this for a law, he said. I am doing it because you are cold. Evelyn reached for his sleeve, but she was too weak to stop him. Ethan shrugged out of the coat, and the mountain air cut through his flannel instantly. He ignored it. He wrapped the coat around her shoulders, pulling it high enough to shield her from the thin line of dawn slipping through the roof. For one breath, nothing happened. Then Evelyn's blood touched the torn inner lining. A red thread of light woke inside the fabric. It spread through the seams like fire moving underwater, forming the thorn-crowned symbol Ethan had seen on the bridge, on the cars, on the device that had led him here. The chapel fell silent. Even the people outside stopped pushing at the door. Evelyn stared at the glowing mark with something close to grief. You do not know what you just gave them, she whispered. Ethan sat back against the door, cold already sinking into his bones, and tightened his grip around the crowbar. No, he said, watching the symbol burn brighter against his coat. But I know what I gave you. A few more minutes. From the forest beyond the chapel came a distant horn, deep and mournful. Evelyn closed her eyes. My clan heard it. The first gold edge of sunrise touched the broken window, and every shadow in the chapel seemed to bow toward the coat on her shoulders. The horn faded into the trees, and the strangers outside the chapel stopped pretending they owned the night. Ethan heard them withdraw from the door, not in panic but in sudden calculation, like men who had realized a larger storm was approaching. He kept his back against the old wood, crowbar across his knees, breath coming out in white bursts. Without his coat, the cold found every seam in his flannel and every old ache in his body. Evelyn sat beneath the broken angel with the coat wrapped around her shoulders, the red symbol glowing along the lining in steady pulses. With each pulse, the air inside the chapel changed. The shadows seemed to lean toward her. The cracked stones under Ethan's boots hummed softly, answering something older than language. Evelyn's face had gone still, but he could see the truth in the way her hand gripped the fabric. She was not afraid of the people outside anymore. She was afraid of what her own people would do when they arrived. "How bad is this?" Ethan asked. Her eyes lifted to him. The red in them was weaker now, but clearer. "For me, complicated. For you, impossible. That is not a medical answer. You are no longer only a man who helped me." She looked toward the glowing mark. "You are evidence." Before Ethan could ask what that meant, the forest went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The wind stopped moving through the pine branches. The distant crows cut off mid-call. Even the old chapel settled into stillness. Then came the sound of boots in snow, hundreds of them, perfectly timed, advancing from every direction. Ethan rose slowly, his bad knee stiff, his fingers wrapped around the crowbar, though he knew it had become a prop more than a weapon. The red glow in the coat brightened. Evelyn drew herself upright, pain tightening her face, but royalty returned to her like a crown placed by invisible hands. "Do not kneel," she said. Ethan glanced back. "I was not planning to. Not to me." Her voice lowered. To them. The chapel door opened before anyone touched it. The barricading pew slid aside on its own with a deep wooden groan, and morning poured through the entrance in a pale wash of gold. Ethan stepped into the doorway first because some stubborn, foolish part of him still believed distance mattered. What waited outside made every thought leave him for one clean second. The clearing had filled with vampires. They stood among the snow-covered pines in rows so precise they looked carved into the landscape, wearing black winter armor and long formal coats that did not move in the wind. Their eyes were crimson, amber, silver, all fixed on the chapel. At the center stood the woman Ethan had seen in the impossible vision of dawn that would come later, tall, silver-haired, crowned in dark metal, her presence turning the entire forest into a throne room. Behind her waited banners marked with the thorn-wrapped crown. No one spoke. No one advanced. They looked first at Ethan, then past him at Evelyn, then at the coat around her shoulders. The symbol burned once, bright enough to stain the snow red. A murmur moved through the army, soft and dangerous. The silver-haired woman raised a hand, and the sound died. Evelyn stepped into the doorway behind Ethan. She did not lean on him, though he could, till it cost her. The coat hung over her like a piece of ordinary human life that had wandered into legend by mistake. The silver-haired woman's expression changed the moment she saw it. Not shock exactly, but recognition sharpened by dread. She moved forward until she was 10 feet from Ethan. "Princess Evelyn," she said, her voice deep, elegant, and cold enough to frost glass. Evelyn inclined her head. "Mother." Ethan's grip tightened. Of course. Because apparently the morning needed a queen. Queen Helena Blackwood looked at Ethan then, fully, and he had the uncomfortable sense that she was not seeing his face so much as weighing his entire life. "Human," she said. "Name yourself." "Ethan Walker." His voice sounded rough in the open air. "Roadside rescue. West Glacier." A few vampires exchanged glances, as if tow truck driver had been announced in a royal court for the first time in history. Queen Helena's gaze dropped to the coat. "Did you place that mantle over my daughter before the first light of dawn?" Ethan heard Evelyn inhale behind him. He looked at the queen, then at the soldiers, then at the faint red glow pulsing from his own worn jacket. "I gave her my coat because she was freezing. That is not what I asked." "Then ask better." The clearing tightened around him. Several warriors shifted, not attacking, just offended on a cultural level Ethan had no training for. Evelyn said his name softly, a warning. But Queen Helena did not strike him down. Something like interest passed through her ancient eyes. Did you know the law? No. Did she ask for the mantle? She told me not to do it. A sharper murmur passed through the clan. Queen Helena looked at her daughter. Evelyn held her gaze. He speaks truth. The queen closed her eyes for 1 second, and when she opened them, the whole forest seemed to understand before Ethan did. The first warrior lowered to one knee, then another, then the entire front line. Armor touched snow in a rolling wave. Heads bowed, fists pressed to chests. Ethan stepped back instinctively, almost bumping into Evelyn. Why are they doing that? He whispered. Evelyn did not answer. Queen Helena did. Because the Mantle Claim has answered royal blood. Because my daughter was covered by your living warmth in the hour between death and dawn. Because the old law recognizes what the modern court will despise. The tallest warrior spoke the words that turned Ethan's confusion into a sentence he could not escape. Chosen maid of Princess Evelyn Blackwood. Ethan stared at him. Absolutely not. No one laughed. That was the terrifying part. Queen Helena stepped closer. Her face held no joy, only the heavy burden of a ruler watching history misbehave. Mr. Walker, this is not a reward. This is not romance. This is a claim older than our written treaties. By sunset, every noble house in the Northern Dominion will know a human has been named beside the Blackwood heir. Ethan looked back at Evelyn. She looked angry, exhausted, and deeply sorry. That bothered him more than the army. Can we undo it? He asked. Queen Helena's answer came quietly. The court will try, and many of them will believe the simplest way to undo the law is to remove you from it. The horns sounded again, this time from far beyond the clearing, answered by others in the mountains. Evelyn's fingers closed around the edge of his coat. Not to claim him, not to command him, to steady herself. Queen Helena turned toward her soldiers. Prepare the escort. We return to Blackwood Hall. Ethan exhaled, watching hundreds of immortal warriors rise from the snow because of one coat, one wound, and one decision he had made in the cold. He had thought surviving until dawn would end the nightmare. Instead, dawn had given it witnesses. Blackwood Hall stood 20 miles deeper into the mountains, hidden behind a ridge Ethan had driven past for years without knowing an entire kingdom waited on the other side. The escort did not use the public road. They moved through a private pass where the snow parted ahead of the Queen's carriage and closed again behind it, leaving no tracks for county deputies, hunters, or confused tow truck drivers to follow. Ethan sat across from Evelyn in a black vehicle that felt less like a car and more like a sealed room on wheels. The windows were shaded against the growing daylight, but thin lines of red glass. Let him see shapes outside: pine forests, cliffs, frozen waterfalls, and stone towers rising where a mountain face should have been. Evelyn had refused a stretcher. She sat upright with his coat still around her shoulders, the glowing mark hidden beneath one careful hand. Her face had regained some color, though her eyes remained tired. Ethan wanted to ask 10 questions. He settled for one. Is your court really going to make this worse than almost being taken in the woods? Evelyn looked at him with a dry sadness. My court has made an art form of making everything worse. Before he could answer, the car passed beneath an archway carved straight into black stone, and Blackwood Hall revealed itself. It was not a castle the way tourists imagine castles. It was larger, colder, and far more alive, a fortress of obsidian walls and silver-veined towers built into the mountain itself. Crimson banners hung from balconies high enough to disappear into drifting cloud. Stone bridges connected towers across open air. Armed guards stood everywhere, silent beneath wolf-shaped helmets, watching Ethan with the focused suspicion usually reserved for dangerous weather and loaded firearms. The vehicle stopped in a courtyard wide enough to hold a football field, its dark paving stones polished mirror-smooth beneath a dusting of snow. The moment Ethan stepped out, every conversation in the courtyard died. Servants froze with silver trays in hand. Soldiers turned. Nobles in black coats and winter gowns stared as though a stray dog had walked into a congressional hearing and been given a seat. Ethan became suddenly aware of everything ordinary about himself. The torn flannel, the soaked jeans, the boots stained with road salt, the grease under his nails, the old scar near his eyebrow, the fact that he had not slept and probably smelled like snow, motor oil, and fear. Beside him, Evelyn stood with royal control, but the coat betrayed the story. It was too human, Too worn, too personal, and everyone saw it. Queen Helena ascended the courtyard steps without looking back. "Bring them to the Hall of Judgment," she ordered. Ethan leaned closer to Evelyn. "That name feels a little unfriendly." "It is friendlier than the old name." "What was the old name?" "The room where mercy goes to be negotiated." "You know what? I prefer Hall of Judgment." Her mouth almost curved, but the moment passed as the great doors opened. Inside, the hall rose higher than any church Ethan had ever entered, with a ceiling lost among hanging lamps that burned red instead of gold. The floor was black stone. The walls were lined with family banners, each marked by different symbols: wolves, roses, ravens, moons, swords, crowns. Vampires filled the tiers on both sides, nobles arranged by rank like a living map of power. Some looked fascinated. Some looked insulted. A few looked hungry for scandal, which Ethan recognized from small towns, hospital waiting rooms, and garage offices where people pretended gossip was concern. At the far end, a raised dais held 3 seats, the center one belonging to Queen Helena. She did not sit. She stood before it, crown catching the red light, and let the court look long enough to understand there would be no hiding what had happened. Then she spoke. "Princess Evelyn Blackwood has returned alive. The Mantle Claim has answered. The human Ethan Walker stands under ancient recognition until this court decides what law permits and honor demands." The reaction came like a storm contained behind glass. Whispers, sharp breaths, low words and languages Ethan could not understand. Evelyn stood beside him, chin raised, but her fingers tightened once on the coat. The gesture was small. He noticed anyway. From the right side of the hall, a man stepped forward. He was tall, immaculate, blonde in a pale metallic way, wearing a tailored black coat fastened with a silver clasp shaped like a cross wrapped in thorns. Unlike the others, he did not look surprised. That made Ethan pay attention. "Your Majesty," the man said, bowing just enough to be proper and not enough to be humble. "Before this court entertains the absurdity of a roadside human being tied to the Blackwood heir, we must consider contamination, manipulation, and deliberate mortal trickery." Evelyn's eyes went cold. "Choose your next words carefully, Lord Nathaniel." So this was him. The political fiancé. The man Evelyn had not named, but whose shadow had been standing in the chapel before he ever arrived. Nathaniel turned toward her with a smile that had no warmth in it. "I choose every word for your protection, Princess. You were injured, isolated, vulnerable to influence." This man placed his scent, his warmth, and his object over royal blood at the most legally sensitive hour of the night. We cannot assume innocence simply because he looks too simple to scheme. A few nobles murmured approval. Ethan felt heat rise in his face, not from embarrassment, but from the clean old anger of hearing a room full of powerful people discuss a wounded woman as if she had been a misplaced inheritance. Queen Helena watched him. Evelyn watched Nathaniel. Nathaniel watched the court. Everyone was measuring something. Ethan cleared his throat. The hall quieted, more out of disbelief than respect. "For the record," he said, "I did not know there was a legally sensitive hour of the night. I knew she was cold. I knew she was hurt. I knew someone outside that chapel was lying. That was the entire plan." Nathaniel's smile sharpened. How noble. How conveniently plain. Evelyn stepped forward before Ethan could answer. The coat shifted on her shoulders, and the red mark flashed beneath the fabric. The entire court fell silent again. "He touched me with mercy," she said, voice carrying to the highest balcony. "That is more than many in this hall have offered me in a century." Nathaniel's expression did not break, but something in his eyes did. A tiny flicker. Ethan saw it. So did Queen Helena. Then, from somewhere high in the court, an elder voice called out, "If the human is false, let the proof be drawn before sunset. If the claim is false, let the law release him. If the law is true, let every house decide whether it can endure a human beside the heir." The hall erupted into whispers again. Ethan looked at Evelyn. "That sounds like a vote where the prize is my life getting much more complicated." Evelyn did not look away from Nathaniel. "No, Ethan," she said softly. "That was the polite beginning of a trial." Nathaniel bowed toward the queen, but his gaze lingered on Ethan with quiet promise. Outside the tall windows, daylight struck the mountain glass, and the whole hall filled with the color of blood-red dawn. The trial did not begin with witnesses. It began with objects. Queen Helena ordered 3 things placed on the black stone table at the center of the Hall of Judgment. Ethan's burned medical gauze, the royal signal device from the fallen guard, and the pale metal fragment removed from Evelyn's wound by a surgeon whose hands never shook. The fragment sat under a glass dome, no longer than Ethan's thumb, shining with a cold blue-white light that made the nearest vampires step back despite themselves. Silver, but not ordinary silver. Even Ethan could see that. It had been shaped too cleanly, etched too precisely, treated with some chemical that left faint frost crawling along the inside of the glass. The court leaned forward as one living shadow. Nathaniel stood on the opposite side of the table, calm enough to make Ethan distrust every breath he took. Evelyn sat in a high-backed chair near the dais, still recovering, still wrapped in Ethan's coat because the ancient mark refused to fade. She looked stronger now, but Ethan had learned to read the small tells. The controlled breath, the stiff set of her shoulders, the way her fingers rested near the glowing seam as if reminding herself that it was real. Queen Helena touched the edge of the glass dome with one black-gloved finger. "This is the silver that weakened my daughter." Nathaniel bowed his head. "Then let us honor the obvious, Your Majesty. Human hunters have grown bold in recent years. A human appears at the exact hour of crisis. A human covers royal blood. A human benefits from confusion. There is your pattern." Ethan looked at him. "You keep saying human like it is evidence." A ripple moved through the court, quickly silenced. Nathaniel smiled. "In this hall, Mr. Walker, it often is." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not answer. Anger was easy. Anger was bait. He had learned that in the army, and he had relearned it under every broken engine where frustration never loosened a bolt. Instead, he looked at the table. The medical gauze had been taken from his kit. The signal device had belonged to Evelyn's guard. The silver fragment had been inside her. 3 objects, 3 stories, and one thing about them bothered him enough to make everything else go quiet. "Can I ask a question?" he said. Queen Helena's eyes shifted to him. "You may." Nathaniel gave a soft laugh. "How generous." "The mechanic wishes to inspect royal evidence." "Former medic," Ethan said without looking at him. "And yes." He stepped closer to the table. 2 guards moved as if to stop him, but Helena raised her hand. Ethan pointed at the silver under the dome. "If human hunters made this, why is it designed not to finish the job?" The hall went still. Nathaniel's smile thinned. "Careful." Ethan ignored him. That fragment was not meant to cause a fast death. It was meant to keep her weak, conscious, movable, unable to heal quickly, but alive. That is not a hunter pattern. That is an extraction pattern. Evelyn's eyes found his across the room. Something in them sharpened. Ethan turned to Queen Helena. The guard at the crash site used the same word. Extraction. He said they wanted her alive. An elder vampire leaned forward from the left tier. "Many enemies would want the princess alive." "Sure," Ethan said. "But how many would know her route, her escort formation, and the exact kind of silver that keeps a royal vampire alive long enough to force a political outcome?" Nathaniel's voice cut across the hall. "This is speculation from a frightened outsider." "No," Ethan said, finally looking at him. "This is what I did for years. You learn the difference between chaos and planning when people are hurt and everyone lies about how it happened." The Queen's expression did not change, but her attention deepened. "Continue." Ethan swallowed. This was where common sense begged him to stop. He was standing in a vampire court accusing a nobleman with more power, history, and wardrobe budget than Ethan would ever have. But Evelyn was watching him, not as a princess needing rescue, and not as a monster in a chapel. She was watching as someone who had been told for too long that fear was proof she needed control. Ethan pointed to the silver fragment. "Turn it." Toward the sunrise. Several nobles protested at once. Queen Helena silenced them with a glance. A guard adjusted the glass dome until a narrow beam of red daylight from the tall windows struck the metal. For a second, nothing happened. Then a hidden mark glimmered along the etched surface, a cross wrapped in thorns. The same shape as the clasp on Nathaniel's coat. The court inhaled. Nathaniel did not move. That was worse than denial. Queen Helena's voice lowered. "Lord Nathaniel Cross." Evelyn stood slowly. The coat slipped at one shoulder, and the glowing seam brightened as if the room itself had taken a breath. "You knew I would refuse the union again after the Winter Council," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it reached every balcony. So you arranged fear in the shape of rescue. Nathaniel's mask finally cracked, not into panic, but contempt. I arranged stability. You were beloved by soldiers, admired by border houses, impossible to guide. A princess without fear cannot be ruled. The words landed like ice. No one spoke. Ethan felt the hall tilt around that confession, not because Nathaniel had been cruel, but because too many people in the room had understood his logic before they condemned it. Evelyn stepped down from the dais. Guards shifted near Nathaniel, but she lifted one hand, and they stopped. You did not want a wife, she said. You wanted a throne that looked like me. Nathaniel's eyes flashed. And what does the human want? Shall we pretend his mercy is pure because he owns fewer knives? Ethan answered before the court could turn. I do not want your throne. He looked at Evelyn, then at Queen Helena. And I do not want to own the woman I tried to keep alive. The mark on the coat flared red. The court saw it. So did Nathaniel. For the first time, fear touched his face, not of Ethan, but of a law he could not bribe, charm, or command. Queen Helena raised her hand, and the guards closed around him without ceremony. No spectacle, no cruelty, just the sudden collapse of a future he had built on someone else's fear. As Nathaniel was led from the hall, he looked back at Evelyn. You think freedom will make you safe? Evelyn's answer was calm. No, but it will make my choices mine. Ethan felt the entire court shift then, not toward approval, not yet, but towards something more dangerous to old power, uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, Evelyn turned to him with the first unguarded expression he had seen on her face since to him with the chapel, as if he had not saved her from an enemy, but from a story everyone had already written for her. The Hall of Judgment did not cheer when Nathaniel was taken away. Vampire courts were too old for cheering and too proud for visible relief. They reacted with silence, which Ethan had learned could mean anything from respect to planning another problem. Queen Helena let that silence stretch until every noble house had to sit inside what had just been proven. The silver had not come from human hunters. The ambush had not been a border accident. The danger to Evelyn had been built inside the same system that claimed it existed to protect her. At last, the queen touched the black stone table, and the glass dome over the silver fragment clouded with frost. Lord Nathaniel Cross will be stripped of court authority, removed from the Winter Council, and held for judgment under royal law, she said. His house will answer for every guard he placed, every route he purchased, and every lie he laid before this throne. No spectacle followed. No grand punishment for the crowd to feed on. Just a row of cross banners dimming one by one along the wall as their silver threads went dull, as if the hall itself had withdrawn recognition. That was when Ethan understood vampire justice could be colder than anger. It could erase a man from the room while he was still breathing in it. But the harder question remained standing beside him in a worn army coat. An elder with white eyes rose from the left tier, his cane clicking once against the floor. The traitor is named, he said. The claim remains. What is the court to do with a human marked by royal law? The old fear returned in a different shape. Ethan felt it move through the hall, not as hatred alone, but as panic dressed in tradition. Queen Helena looked toward the glowing seam on the coat. The Mantle Claim is older than our houses, she said, speaking now not only to Ethan but to every balcony. In the first winters, before treaties and titles, royal blood could not be left exposed between night and dawn. Whoever gave living warmth freely, without bargain, became shield, witness, and chosen companion under the law. It was never meant to be ownership. It was meant to prove that power could survive only when someone chose to protect it without demanding the throne in return. The words settled over the court like snow. Ethan finally understood the shape of the trap. The law had not mistaken his action for romance. People had. The law had recognized a promise he had made without language. Stay alive. I am here. I will not use your weakness against you. Queen Helena descended from the dais, each step slow and formal. She stopped before Ethan and held out his coat with both hands, though Evelyn was still wearing it. Mr. Walker, she said, ancient law has placed your name beside my daughter's, but my court will not keep a human by fear and call it honor. You may walk out of Blackwood Hall before sunset. Your debts will be paid. Your memories will remain your own. No guard will follow you, and no noble house will touch your family. That is my word as queen. The offer struck harder than any threat. Ethan thought of Rachel's hospital bills, Frank's garage, Marcy's voice on the radio, the easy lie of going back to ordinary life, and telling himself the mountain had simply been strange for one terrible night. He could leave. He could choose safety. For the first time since the bridge, no one was blocking the door. Evelyn turned toward him, and the whole court watched for her to command, plead, or claim. She did none of those things. She slowly removed the coat from her shoulders and placed it in Ethan's hands. Without it, she looked more royal and more alone. "You owe me nothing," she said, her voice steady enough to reach the highest tier. "You did not ask for my law, my court, or my enemies. You gave warmth to someone who had been taught that protection always came with chains. If you leave, I will defend that choice before every house here." Ethan looked down at the coat. The fabric was stained, torn, and glowing softly along the inner seam, absurd and holy in his grease-marked hands. Then he looked at the court, at all those immortal faces waiting to learn whether a human would grab power, flee from it, or do something they had not prepared for. "I am not staying because a mark told me to," he said. "I am not staying because anyone bowed. And I am definitely not staying because I understand half of what happened today." A faint ripple moved through the soldiers. Almost laughter, but not quite brave enough to become it. Ethan stepped toward Evelyn and held the coat out, not around her, not over her, but between them. "I am staying because when I found you in that chapel, everyone wanted something from you. Your enemies wanted control. Your court wanted proof. The law wanted an answer. You needed one person who did not want to own the outcome. I can try to be that person, if you still want me standing there." Evelyn's eyes changed then, not brighter, but warmer, like a candle seen through red glass. She took the coat with both hands and faced the court. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I choose Ethan Walker freely, before queen, clan, and crown. Not as my owner, not as my escape, as my chosen mate, my shield by consent, and my witness when this court forgets that I am a person before I am a bloodline." The mark on the coat softened from crimson fire to a deep, steady gold. Across the hall, swords lowered point first to the stone. One by one, soldiers bowed their heads. Then the nobles followed, some reluctantly, some with wonder, until the entire hall of judgment bent around the impossible sight of a vampire princess and a roadside human rewriting an ancient law without breaking it. Queen Helena placed her hand over the thorn-crowned emblem on the table. "So recorded," she said. "Ethan Walker is recognized as oath-bearer of Blackwood Hall and chosen mate by free declaration. The Blackwood roads will open to human rescue under royal protection. No life in our territory will be abandoned because pride fears mercy." For the first time, Evelyn smiled where everyone could see it, small but real. She stepped beside Ethan and draped the old coat across both their shoulders, not to bind him, but to share its warmth. Outside the red glass windows, the storm had ended. Dawn spread over the Montana mountains, turning the black towers silver, and as the palace doors opened before them, every blade in the courtyard lowered in silent recognition. Ethan had entered the night as a man answering a roadside call. He walked into the morning beside a princess who had finally been allowed to choose, while behind them an ancient clan learned that mercy from a human could become law. Far beyond the northern ridge, one forgotten bell answered the sunrise, soft enough that only Evelyn heard it. And this time she did not look afraid.